who's as adamant about his or her position as I am about mine, whom you think is sharp. Seriously, we know that. And another thing, we heard him say that... Hey sports fans, Larry Elder here. Welcome to yet another edition of And Another Thing. This is, believe it or not, edition number 54. If you'd like to become an Eldorado, go to my website, larryelder.com, fill out the form. You'll get a copy of Michael and Me, which is a feature-length pro-Second Amendment documentary where I confront Michael Moore, and 3 times I ask the esteemed director how many times Americans use guns every year to defend themselves, and 3 times he said, well, you'll have to get the DVD to find out what he said. Go to larryelder.com. Now for episode number 54. I want to talk about an encounter I recently had when I went to a memorial for a good friend of mine. His name is Alan Schoenberg. He died at the age of, I believe it was 85 years old, after a very, very amazing life of charity, of hard work, of enriching a number of people. He was the CEO of a company called Management Recruiters, which is the largest executive recruiting firm in the world. He's made many, many people millionaires and built the relationship, the business on relationships. That's why I was there. So I'm there and I run into a friend of mine named Paul. Paul happened to be black. I don't know if you've noticed it, but I am too. Paul happens to be a lawyer, as am I, so we have quite a bit in common. I hadn't run into him in a long time. In fact, I hadn't seen him in about 25 or 30 years. He and his wife are very, very active in local Democratic politics. And when he was introducing me to some friend of his, he said, well, this is my friend Larry Elder. He is, this radical guy on radio. We don't always agree. And then he proceeded to say something else about me. After doing this 2 or 3 times at this gathering, I had had enough, and finally I turned to him and I said, I don't understand how any rational, thoughtful, thinking black person can remain in the Democratic Party. At that point, it was on. And we had a very intense but polite conversation outside the location when the memorial services were over. And here are the things that I told him. Later on, I put him in a letter, and I've got a feeling I've got a feeling that my friend Paul may have an industrial-sized case of cognitive dissonance after he got through reading my letter and after he got through thinking about some of the things that he and I talked about. Now, what did we talk about? I told him that there is nothing more fundamental than the structure of the family. It is the structure of the family that gives people the values of work ethics, of teaching people how to understand the difference between right and wrong. It is fundamental to how we become rational, thoughtful American citizens, right? And I told him that between 1890 and 1940, depending upon the city, a black kid was slightly more likely than a white kid to be raised in a nuclear 2-parent household. Fast forward to 2013, we're talking now about 75% of black kids are born outside of wedlock, and something like 85% of these kids will at some point be raised in a home with no father, considering the high rate of divorce we have right now. Well, why would the lack of 2-parent households be greater now for blacks in 2013 than back in 1890, when clearly racism was far, far more serious and poverty was far, far more serious? And the reason I mention that, as I told Paul, is that you can't blame racism and you can't blame poverty on the non-formation of these families. You have to look to the policies of the welfare state that you and your wife have embraced. And I told him that I think it was around 1920, only about 5% of kids were born outside of wedlock. You fast forward now, that number is 43%. So the number of kids born in single-parent households in the white community and in the Hispanic community is similarly affected by what we've done. And what we've done is we provided money to women to allow them to have these kinds of family structures, provided there's no man in the house. And we've allowed the man to abandon his financial and moral responsibility. In short, the welfare state has done more damage to the nuclear intact black family than Jim Crow and even slavery did. Even my friend Paul, acknowledged that was going on. I said, let's move on to some of the other policies now. Let's talk about education. What is the route we always hear to the middle class? Education. What do we hear from the left? That education is a 21st century civil rights issue. Well, let's look at what President Obama has done personally with regard to education. His mom sent him when he was 10 years old. Next question. Joyce is from Burlington, Vermont. As a new Eldorado, and welcome, Joyce, I got your video about gun control. Thank you for that. I was wondering if Michael Moore ever contacted you about making him look like a buffoon in your video? Well, Michael Moore does not need my help in making him look like a buffoon. I know that was kind of snarky. But no, the reason I did this whole documentary, Michael and me, was I hope you enjoyed this small excerpt. If you want to see the full video, got to be in El Dorado. Go to my website, larryelder.com, log in, fill out the form. It'll cost you about $4.75 a month, or about the price of a mocha frappuccino latte at your favorite coffee house. As you can tell, I don't like coffee. I'm a tea drinker. See you next time.